Buyer's Perspective webinar series. In this latest session, we'll tackle one of the more interesting disconnects between buyers and sellers. While most deals remain highly competitive, there's a whole other area out there that too many sellers are not taking advantage of. To share a buyer's perspective on this horizon of new opportunities, I welcome back the host of the series, Chairman and co-founder of Executive Conversation, Jim Melillo. Jim's career includes broad CFO experience with both public and private companies, mergers and acquisitions, as well as financing. Let me quickly share a couple logistical details, and we'll get this session started. This presentation will run approximately 30 minutes, at the end of which we'll address as many of your questions as we have time. We'll also be asking some polling questions during this session and ask for your participation in those. Jim, without further ado, let me turn it over to you.
Eric, thanks so very much, and welcome everybody. And I want to start off by apologizing for the title. The title was, to be honest with you, a tough one to write because we think this is probably one of the most impactful webinars we've ever done. And so what we have here is a webinar that's going to appeal to every one of these companies. Thank you all for joining this webinar. But second of all, that is going to appeal to you as an individual. And of course, we're going to do a poll and take a look at your specific knowledge around this factor, and then we're going to try to expand your thinking beyond that. What makes the webinar so important today, it was written just for you. Not for everybody on this webinar, just for you. So you who's sitting there doing emails, you who's sitting there looking around, focus because this is about you. And you need to figure out how every slide fits within your company, your solution, your products, how it fits with you. And that's what's going to make today's webinar so different, because it applies to medical, technology, services, manufacturing, and software. But it was written just for you. So as we talked about, let's start off with a simple poll. And the poll is going to focus in on a very narrow area that, by the way, we're going to use throughout this webinar, but has nothing to do with supply chain. It has to do with you in financial planning. It has to do with you in real estate. It has to do with you in technology. Question is very simple. Supply chain functions can include A, product development, B, marketing, C, operations, D, finance, E, all the above. So the poll is open. You've got 15 seconds to take a look at it. You got a chance now to vote. And now we're going to close the poll. So, Eric, if you would, what kind of numbers did we get?
Jim, a clear winner has emerged here at E, all of the above, at 87%, followed by product development, and then a scattering of responses across options B, C, and D.
And so what we have is a good recognition that something as simple as supply chain really applies to all the parts of the company. Well, I'm going to turn that concept on its head and say to you, everything you do that doesn't pertain to supply chain does. Because you limit your thinking. When I talk about this topic, you think it's about manufacturing and raw materials. I know you voted 87% on all the above because you want to look sharp, but the reality is that when you talk about risk management, you immediately think, I need to talk to the insurance, the legal, the data. When you talk about inventory control, you think I need to talk to warehousing. That is not the way I run my business. So I want you to think about as if you were running the business. Now, originally, we highlighted the word you. Think about this as if you were running the business. But I changed it to were. What that means is I want you to step past where in the past I told you, think about you running the business to as if you were right inside of it, as if you were understanding the breadth and depth of what's going on. What that means is that when you come to me with your product, software, solution, service, whatever it is, I need for you to not only tell me how it works relative to R&D, but you also need to be able to explain how that's a revenue and a manufacturing-oriented solution. How you apply not just to the patients in the hospital, but you also apply to the physician recruitment. You also apply to the community standards. You also apply to the revenue recognition of your customer. That breadth, whether it goes from revenue up to R&D, manufacturing, HR, IT, or the other way around, is what makes you so important. So we've chosen supply chain because the vast majority of you don't think you are involved in it, and we're now asking you to think about, as an R&D-oriented company, how do you apply to supply chain? As a sales and marketing company, how do you apply to supply chain? As a big data on sales and marketing, how do you apply to the supply chain? We want you to change the way you think. Because my company is changing constantly, I'm looking for people that can enable change, support change, and then also help me recognize change. In talking about enabling change, going back to this simple concept of supply chain, you can see a large number of things that are going on right now. And this has basically caused people to have parts missing, outages, and the like. My question is, how does this apply to you when you only work with R&D? How does this apply to you when you only work in healthcare? How does it apply to you when you only, and I can keep you only all throughout this conversation, and that's going to let you know the reason I'm saying to that is because you are never you only. How do you apply to R&D? How do you apply to finance? How do you apply to supply chain? Those people that can have that conversation are the ones that bring value. As we take a look at why am I interested in this discussion, it's because I can't prevent disruptions, but I can figure out how to respond to them. I can figure out how I can make a change. So I have disruption. How does that deal with my labor issue? I have currency volatility. How does that deal with disruption? I have technology change. How does that deal with? Think so much broader than you normally do. Think about the linkage between yourself and my business. And that linkage between yourself and my business is one of those things that gives you then the opportunity to address my larger problems. My problems are never supply chain. They're never labor issues. They're never R&D. My problems are an interrelationship between all of them that results in my products getting commoditized. My labor rates in the hospital are going up. I'm finding that I'm late to market with my new products. I'm finding that my cost of goods sold is not as low as it should be. Your discussion with me needs to recognize what's wrong with my business, and then you need to link through to that. You can't create the total problem. There is massive complexity in my organization. I've got partners that I need to reduce risk, both upstream partners and downstream partners, suppliers and partners that help me sell. How do you help me with that? How do you recognize that when you're talking to me about a financial services product? How do you help me when you're talking to me about a real estate issue? How about when you're talking to me about a supply chain problem? How does that relate to my partners that sell? What is the information sharing, the visibility, the collaboration that allows to do that? How do you create a virtual supply chain versus a fixed? How do you help me overcome Sandy in New York, the floods on the Chao Phraya River in Thailand, the tsunami in Japan, when you are working with me around social media, big data, data mining? My problem is never big data. My problem is never data mining. My problem is never even supply chain. My problems are my company has a lower gross margin than the competitors. My problem is I'm losing market share 1 percentage point at a time in Brazil. Your solution is never going to become the total solution. But when you begin to think about how do you affect my total company and link to my initiatives in your own way, you get to that bigger picture. You get to begin to see how you can talk about it. So we always give practical steps. What are some of the things you first need to do? First of all, you need to begin to understand what are my endpoints, starting points, output, and client's needs or customer's customer. You then need to identify who are the key organizational transitions, but more importantly, how does your department you're working with, your division, your company, help me with this transition? Is it external, internal, automated, manual? How do you help me with any one of these different issues that are going on within my organization? It is complex, it is difficult, but it is the people who can do this that make me want to call your partner, that I look to for your guidance. I've always said that on every problem I had, this was the number of companies that were going to be supplying products, services, solutions, software to me solving that problem. I'm always looking for just 1 or 2 partners, and the rest can be vendors. It's okay. And if you can't get the 2 people to be partners with me, then I go hire a consulting firm, and I take that $10 million out of everybody's hide. The point being here that all of these companies that you see up here are going to be vendors on a single project. And so over here, you're going to have somebody who has software for inventory, and out here you're going to have somebody that has the ability to schedule trucks and the ability to have distribution online. You're only going to be part of this picture, but you need to understand how you align with all of these other groups. How do you take the idea of your product and see that bigger picture? So that brings us to the supporting the change. The supporting the change means that you have now figured out this enabling the change, figured out how you link in there, and now you're going to expand that. You're going to help me see it. You're going to help me understand how I go from before sales to after growth. How do I move from we need to increase sales 3%, to how do I grow my business by market, by geography? How do you go from having this old discussion to this new discussion, from customer to performance? Take a look at a few examples here. Poor resource utilization is my problem. Provide operations and maintenance. You can read this. I don't need to. But think about this. This applies to if you're in the pharmaceutical business, how do you get maximum amounts of information to the sales rep, to the pharmaceutical rep in the field in real time? If you're an individual that works in real estate, how do you have access to the entire solution and all the variations in real time? If you're in manufacturing, how do you help me understand the impact if I push one lever I can have on my cost of goods versus another in real time? Next problem, slow time to market. Enable suppliers and customers, again, you can read this. What's so critical about this slide is that there's the first thing called research and development. And so research and development goes down a road. They then hand it off to testing, who then turns it over to prototyping, who then turns it back to redevelopment. As a result of that, who then turns it over to new prototyping, who then begins working on time to supply, then time to production, then time to distribution, then time to market. When you talk to me about R&D, look at really what you're talking to me about. I don't expect you to solve all of these. I do expect you to help me understand how you participate in that through my filter, as if you were running my business, is what I'm looking for you to do. I can choose another one, low customer sat. We have complaints, you make it better. Think about how does somebody who works with the HR line of my income statement affect customer sat? Pretty clearly. How does somebody who works with my manufacturing quality? Pretty clearly. How about my salespeople? Pretty clearly. How about my marketing people? Pretty clearly, et cetera. How about big data? How about social media? Pretty clearly. You have a simple problem, quote, customer complaint. Yet if you understand how you impact my business, and then how that rolls to the areas up and downstream, all the way from beginning supplier through me all the way to end user, you have the ability to do that. Learning is a journey, not just an event, and this is an event. We hold these events every month. We have between 300 and 900 people online. And you invest 30 minutes in your learning. Why not invest a little bit more? Think about how much time you take to learn to play a sport, to learn to speak a language. Join us on LinkedIn. We've got, 1,200 people already on LinkedIn. If you would, we publish on an ongoing basis articles, insights, and the like on LinkedIn. So, again, if you want to become a learning-oriented individual, take some tangible steps to help yourself. And in this case, it's a pretty easy one to do. And so as we move towards the end, and we've created a change, we've supported a change, ultimately, we want to recognize the change within what the customer cares about, the customer's customer. 25 years ago, The 7 Habits was written. I was surprised it's been that long. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People had a lot to say about success, but the one point that always stuck in my mind, to be honest with you, was begin with the end in mind. And in many ways, that's what I'm asking you to do here. You can work in manufacturing, operations, sales, finance, marketing, but ultimately, for most companies, for most government agencies that are looking to their people that they serve, to their constituents, that is the end. And so you're back here at supply. You're over here at logistics. You're over here at marketing, selling, HR, finance, insurance, risk management, et cetera. How do you affect my customer? So as you begin the conversation with me up here, you should begin that conversation with the end in mind. You need to shift from the beginning, you and your product, to my perspective, which is around my customer. And I expect to see results that come out of this. In the last year, GM will now sell more vehicles, not more revenue, but more vehicles in China than they will in the U.S. And yet Harley-Davidson sells less vehicles in China than they do in Milwaukee. Don't think that my customer understands China. Everybody talks about the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, and China, and India. Don't assume your customer does that. Begin to think about what your customer's end goal is. Is it to innovate in a market that doesn't move and turn a ketchup bottle upside down? Is the goal to create the ability to service my customers even in the wake of a tsunami, which Nissan did? And so you have this interrelationship that, again, we started off with a very simple concept because we wanted you to understand that it applies to all the different parts of my company, that the supply chain is critical to a very small group of people. And yet the concept of how you in R&D link to the supply chain, how you in supply chain link to revenue or marketing or customer support, you have to basically help me see that. My total life, I've built 2.5 factories. Matter of fact, just yesterday I was in Ireland, which brought back good memories of building a factory in Athlone. I put in 3 total IT systems in my whole life. Don't assume that everyone knows things the same way or wants to be helped in the same way. I've done things 2.5 to 3 times. You've sold your solutions, your ideas 50, 100, 200 times. Understand how I want to be valued, how I need to change, how I need to reach my end user. You then become part of my company. As we wrap up, where are some of the areas you want to focus on? Pricing, corporate image, resource utilization, channels to information, channels to multi-channel sales. The answer is change is occurring right now. Think about the banking system and the radical change, the healthcare and the radical change, the technology and the radical change, the manufacturing competition and the radical change. I mean, I could go through literally every industry, and change is the common word that each one of these industries talks about. I need to change. I need partners. I need people that can see the big picture. I need people who can change the way I get bigger market share, lower cost of goods, better patient outcomes, whatever it is. For you, start with the end in mind. Think about my customer's customer. Think about how I make money. And then link your solution to any one of these multiple characteristics that changes my business. That's your goal. That's the message today. That's why we started off with a slide that says, this is the unusual webinar. This webinar is around you specifically. This is not for everybody. It's just you. And the reason it's just about you is because it does apply to your role in technology sales. It does apply to your role in healthcare marketing. It does apply to your role in manufacturing support. All the people on this call and all of those roles, it does apply to you because it applies to me, the buyer. That's the message to take away. Before we go into the questions, I wanted to ask a favor of everybody. Our companies, you can see these are the awards we've won this year, have basically begun to revolutionize how learning and change occurs. We even decided to show people how things are different by becoming one of the only IACET training companies in the world. IACET, for those of you that don't know it, are the people who legitimize when a doctor needs to go back and get more learning credits, or an accountant, or a nuclear power plant operation. These are the people that certify that the courses are valuable, correct, and have the outcome. And so we got IACET certified. So I'm asking you to talk to your vice president about how do we help you make changes in your organization. And if you would, send an email to information@conversation.com or give us a call. If you're a vice president, have somebody give us a call, or you do it yourself. As a simple giveaway, we'll help you assess your people as a courtesy, as a way of getting started on this change. I began talking about how change is critical, that change is about you. The most important ROI in the world is the return you get on your own personal investment in learning and in the time to learn. I want to thank everybody for sticking through some of those technical glitches in the beginning, and I'll turn it over to Eric to see if there are any questions.
Jim, many thanks. Another very insightful presentation. And we often talk about, do you speak business, and you wonder, how do you compare in a competitive sense? Take a look at some of the complimentary assessment options that we have. And as Jim mentioned, the email address info@conversation.com. we'd be happy to set you up with a complimentary ID and take it from there. Jim, quite a number of questions. I'm going to cherry pick some of the ones that had the most response. Early on, you touched on risk mitigation, and several folks asked about how do you financially quantify the value of reducing risk?
There are three ways that we did it. One is the simplest way, which is what is the downside? What are the costs of non-risk mitigation? And as you can see from the recent fines against banks, against the different automobile companies relative to safety, we can go on and on with that list. It's fairly sizable. So the first way we will look at it is what is the cost of not doing it? One of the problems with Obamacare is that they're saying every 25-year-old has to get insurance. But if they don't, it's going to be a couple of $100 downside. So the risk mitigation there is zero. A kid would much rather pay $200 and, quote, not have to get a health insurance than pay $3,000 or $4,000 a month for health insurance. So risk mitigation starts with that. The second way we take a look at risk mitigation is what is the value of mitigating the risk to the organization? Does it allow us to expand into more countries? Does it allow us to grow our product set faster? Does it allow us to take more risk? So the value of, quote, insurance, risk mitigation, is it does allow us to take more risk and to also reduce the downside, the fines of doing that. So I think those are two good ways to quantify it.
Another question pertained to how does what you were talking about here relate to somebody selling an outsourcing solution?
This outsourcing actually goes to the heart of this discussion. The heart of this discussion is how do I end up with talking about and working for and delivering what my customer's customer wants, thus allowing my customer to grow their business and become more successful. Outsourcing allows people to, quote, get out of the way of the stuff they don't do that well and almost hyper-energize the things they do well. It also allows me to take more risks relative to expansion. So you can outsource certain functions that allows me to open up new markets without having to invest significant assets. That's a phenomenal thing. I'm in the business of growing my business by moving to more countries, providing the same product to different geographies. Your outsourcing helps me reduce the cost of doing that, allows me to do it faster, and it becomes invaluable to change. So to me, outsourcing and insourcing are two methods that allow me to, quote, do what I do better than I could without you.
And we've reached the end of the session, so I will just pick one last question related to the last one. This one talking about relating to some of these open space types of opportunities, specifically from top-of-mind CFO care-abouts.
The CFO care-abouts relative to which one of those?
Yeah, just how, what might be some, as I read the question, top-of-mind CFO care-abouts with respect to some of the topics you shared here today.
Sure. I just recently gave a speech, and I said the two least important people in an entire organization are the CIO and the CFO. And everybody looked at me with like this terrorized look, since I'm a former CFO, and also this is what they've been going after. What CFOs, and I won't go into CIOs at this time, different conversation, the reason CFOs are, quote, the least important people is we buy the least. Unless you sell a very specific accounting product, we rarely, quote, buy things. The reason we're so powerful is, one, we have people in every department supporting them, and there are people. So I'll have a financial distribution person, I'll have a financial marketing person, and the like. So the first thing that's on top of mind for CFOs is relative to how is this working out numerically? In other words, given the resources I've lent to manufacturing, R&D, sales, and marketing, how do the numbers look? The second thing that's at the top of mind for CFOs today is literally trying to figure out how to quantify risk mitigation. How do I quantify going into the BRICS? How do I reduce the risk of going into Brazil? So CFOs we're unfortunately somewhat around numbers, but more importantly, we're around everyone's numbers. So what's on top of mind for me are the metrics that involve in the most important departments that make our company successful.
Great. And Jim, we will wrap it up with there. I apologize for those whose questions we were unable to get to. Thank you, everyone, for joining this, and you'll be receiving a link with a recording to today's webinar as well for reviewing as well as sharing with your colleagues. This concludes today's session.